Chapter 319, Meeting 3. Following the dwarf, we soon got out of the northern tower and directly entered the city of Henneler. Upon entering the city, I noticed that compared to before, it was a lot quieter. The liveliness that shrouded the city when I had first arrived was no longer there, and what replaced it was a solemn atmosphere. We're almost there. Walking through the city's empty streets, before long, we arrived in front of a mansion. With metal fences surrounding the place, what I could see from the gap of the fences was a lush green garden filled with all sorts of plants and trees. Stopping beside the gate, the dwarf that led me here pressed onto the bell of the mansion. Then, as if expecting the dwarf's appearance, the gates of the mansion opened up. Key clank. The moment the gates opened, the scenery that I could barely see from the gaps of the fence was now on full display for me to see. Surrounding a large fountain in the middle of the garden was a neat array of plants and trees. The wide range of colors that came from the plants perfectly contrasted the beige-colored mansion that stood in the middle of the garden. Taking a step into the mansion, I took a deep breath. Compared to the city, the air here was much fresher. With both feet outside the mansion gate, the dwarf that brought me here opened his mouth. "Please enter the mansion, me duty be now over and I shall now leave." "Oh, sure," I absent-mindedly replied at the dwarf. My mind was too distracted by the view presented before me. This is amazing. Walking around the mansion, I couldn't help but marvel at the garden. It had to be noted that we were currently underground, meaning that there was no sunlight. For the plants to grow this healthy, it was a testament to how advanced the dwarves were. "You like it?" Startling me out of my thoughts was an aged voice. Without turning around, I already knew who it was. "It's nice," I faintly replied. "I'm glad you like it, Ren." Turning my head, my eyes paused on the old man standing next to me. As I stared at him, he gave me a calm and unfathomable feeling. Looking back at me, he asked, "Should we head inside?" "Sure." Judging from how he called me Ren, he appears to have finally recognized me. Not that it was hard since I wasn't trying to hide it. From how I didn't hide my face, to how I straight up used my real name in the achievement points section. The goal in doing so was to gain his attention. Even if I was acquainted with Waylon, that didn't mean he could allow me to meet Douglas. The purpose of exposing myself was to gain Douglas's attention. "Over here." Upon entering the mansion, Douglas brought me inside of an enormous living room where we sat down. Right as we sat down, Douglas offered me some tea. "Would you like some tea?" "Sure." "Green or black?" "Let's go with black." In contrast to green tea, black tea was much better for relaxing. Now that I had just come out from a long battle, all I wanted to do was relax. "Good choice." With a pleased smile, Douglas waved his hand. Soon, a teapot filled with water materialized in front of us. Then, with a simple touch, the water in the pot began to boil. While he was preparing the tea, he started making small talk with me. "How did you find your stay in Henneler?" "It's a pretty nice place." "Is that so? Anything you didn't like?" "The war." Once the water began to boil, the headmaster threw in black tea leaves before closing the pot. Turning his attention back to me, an amicable smile appeared on his face. "As we wait for the tea to be ready, how about you tell me about your circumstances?" Leaning back on the chair behind me, I crossed my legs. "You want to know why I'm still alive?" Without answering, Douglas continued to smile kindly. "I'll take that as a yes." My previous relaxed attitude disappeared, and what replaced it was a serious one, but I couldn't help it. I was about to take a huge gamble. One that could decide my future. With Douglas not being a part of the Union and being one of the only selfless humans in the novel I wrote, I felt that he could be trusted. He had a deep sense of responsibility, especially to those that were part of the lock. The fact that he was Donna's and Monica's master was a testament to his righteous behavior. He was the one that engraved onto them their current upright and selfless personalities. If there was anyone that could be trusted, it would be him. Now that I thought about it, the changes that had been happening due to what I did shouldn't have affected him since he wasn't within the scope of my changes. But I could never say for sure. After all, I was no god. I didn't know everything. Perhaps the changes that I brought, though unlikely, have changed Douglas into someone different. Still, I knew that I had to take this gamble. How should I begin? It all started when. And so I started to tell Douglas about my experiences. From how I teleported to the monolith to how I escaped and saved the people from the Union to only be stabbed in the back by them. Of course, I did omit some important information, but I did say most of the important stuff. As I recounted the story, I tried my best to suppress my uneven heartbeat. Throughout the whole conversation, the smile on the headmaster's face slowly started to fade as his brows knit tightly. The Union joined hands with the monolith and put a bounty on me. Because of the bounty, I was forced to leave the human domain. It is also the reason why I'm here. Leaning forward, the headmaster's eyes rippled slightly. For a while, he didn't say anything. It wasn't long before he finally opened his mouth. Do you know why the Union decided to agree to your bounty? I do. I replied. At first, I wasn't too sure, but after coming to Henneler, I understood why the Union decided to agree to the monolith's terms. It's because of the war that is currently happening. With the demons not wanting to suffer any major setbacks, they most likely ordered the monolith to cease all forms of conflicts with the Union. I thoughtfully said before leaning back on my chair. Propping my hand on the armrest, and resting my cheek on my hand, I continued. Considering the Union's situation, they chose the most pragmatic solution, which was to accept their offer and sell me out. At the end of the day, they are still not ready to fight against the monolith. Removing the lid from the teapot, Douglas poured the now-ready tea into a tiny porcelain teacup in front of me. Do you resent them? You're referring to the Union? If so, yes, I do. I very much resent them. Knowing Douglas's personality very well, I decided to be honest with my answer. Although their decision was the right one, that didn't mean that I didn't resent them. I very much resented them. But, to throw me under the bus right after getting back home. Let's just say that I was very pissed. Taking a small sip of the tea, Douglas opened his mouth. If I may ask, if you become strong enough to face them, what are you going to do to the Union? Good question. I breathed out. Was I going to let them go for what they did? Was I going to make those that forced me to leave the human domain pay for what they did to me? Or was I going to let them go? Are you planning on causing them significant damage? Lifting my head and staring at Douglas in the eyes, I shook my head. Sadly, not. Although I do resent them, I have to keep the bigger picture in mind. You're referring to the Demon King? Yes. No matter how much I hated the people at the Union, they were still powerful people. If I wanted to defeat the Demon King, I needed them to live. Closing my eyes and musing for a moment, uncrossing my legs and leaning forward, I softly said. For the meantime, whatever I do to the Union, it'll be on the forms of self-defense. As for what happens later. Putting the teacup down, I looked at the small ripples that appeared on the tea. That'll depend on the future. Following my words, a deep silence shrouded the room. Then, with my eyes locked on Douglas, I patiently waited for his answer. Sigh. After a while, putting the teacup down, Douglas let out a sigh. That's good enough for now. Standing up, with his hands behind his back, he walked towards a particular painting. Halting his steps, with his back facing me, he softly muttered. Although I do not wish for you to carry on the hatred you have for the Union, I do understand where you are coming from. Though his words were soft, they powerfully rang inside of my ears. The reason why I have never joined the Union is precisely because of their pragmatic view on lives. Douglas closed his eyes slightly. They are those that add value to life, and I do not agree with such a view. Every life is as important as the other, and the moment we think of it that way, our society will fall apart. Listening to Douglas from the side, my brows progressively furrowed. As expected, I wasn't wrong about him. He really had high morals. I was more and more convinced about this the more I listened to him. Turning his head, Douglas looked at me with clear eyes. The reason you told me everything is because you want me to protect you when the time is right, correct? Blinking slowly, I nodded my head. That is correct. I like your honesty. A small smile appeared on Douglas's face. Turning to face the painting one more time, he interlocked his hands behind his back. I will not interfere with what you wish to do with the Union, however, I do wish for you to keep in mind the bigger picture. No matter how much you hate them, they are individuals who will play a big role when the time comes that the Demon King descends. If the Union falls into chaos, our chances against the Demon King will decrease. I'll keep those words in mind. From the very start, I was trying to keep the bigger picture in mind. At the end of the day, my goal was to survive the third cataclysm. For that, I needed as many pieces on the board as possible. Still, it wasn't like I was going to let them go scot-free for what they did to me. Once I had enough power, I was definitely going to let them understand what they did. I'm satisfied as long as you think that. Clank. Cutting Douglas off, the living room door suddenly opened, and a haggard figure walked in. The moment he entered the room, the mana in the room thickened up considerably. Ugh. Douglas, I was so close in defeating that, huh? What are you doing here? It was then that Waylon suddenly noticed my presence. I called him here. Douglas replied with a helpless smile. You did? Oh, right. You did mention something about you recognizing him. Slumping on a sofa near me, Waylon helped himself to a cup of tea. After taking a sip of the tea, Waylon's shoulders fully relaxed. Ha! Letting out a relaxed sound, he lifted his head and looked at Douglas. So, what did you guys talk about? That. Turning to face Douglas, my face twitched. It wasn't like I could reveal to Douglas what had happened with the Union when he was the vice leader of the organization. Although his position was lower than the 7 heads, he was still the vice leader. Fortunately, Douglas understood this as well. However, the answer he gave completely caught me off guard. We were talking about a new assignment that I will be giving him. Blinking a couple of times, a look of understanding appeared on Waylon's face. Oh. Are you talking about that job? Yes. Hold on, what are you guys talking about? What in the world were the two of them talking about? It's better if I show you. Walking towards me, Douglas waved his hand, and a piece of paper appeared in his hand. The task is simple. All you need to do is protect someone. Chapter 320, Revelation 1. Jomnuk Dreamgrip. High priority target. Main operator of the defensive system. Responsible for setting up the defensive barrier around Henneler and the only dwarf that is capable of doing so. Believed to be currently targeted by multiple assassins sent by the Inferno. Jomnuk Dreamgrip? Inferno? Defensive barrier? The more I read, the more I realized that this was no simple task. Turning my head to face Douglas, I asked. Is this the correct assignment? That's correct, you must protect the target from Inferno. The dwarven equivalent of the monolith. Douglas's face suddenly turned serious. You must be very careful, they are a group made up of Duergar, a subrace of dwarves that contract themselves with demons. Douglas explained from the side. Part of the information he was telling me, I knew. But I still listened carefully. I've long realized that I did not know everything. Just because I wrote this world didn't mean that all the information that I knew was correct. On most occasions, there was extra useful information that I was not aware of. Like for example, what Douglas was explaining to me at the moment. Unlike the dwarves, who are an honorable race, Duergars are much more insidious and sneaky. Not only are they adept in setting up ambushes, but they also specialize in hidden weapons, and some even go as far as using poisons. Therefore, you must be extra careful when fighting against them since they might appear when you least expect it. The more he spoke, the warier I became. Turning my attention back on the papers, my frown deepened. If I may ask, why me? If what he said and what was written were real, then that would mean I would have to safeguard an extremely important person from an organization equivalent to the monolith. I was in no way qualified to handle this sort of high-profile mission. Putting the papers down, I looked up. If I have to be frank, I don't think I'll be able to do much with my strength. I'd be more of a burden than actually help. Don't worry about that. Douglas walked back to his seat with a calm smile and looked at Waylon. You won't be the only one that will be going. Me too? Dumbfounded, Waylon put the teacup down. The demons will soon attack again, don't you think they will need me here? This is more important. Douglas shook his head and handed Waylon another stack of papers. They asked for at least one S-ranked individual. Since you just fought, I thought that you were the perfect fit for the job. Letting out a groan, Waylon lazily slumped back on his chair. Who else is going? Can I bring more people? As many as you want. The dwarves have entrusted us with protecting Jomnuk. Though they did send a couple of people to aid you. Any strength requirement when selecting the members? No. You don't have to worry about that. Your strength is enough to handle most of the attacks. The rest can be brought to handle the weaker individuals or help with miscellaneous stuff. Taking the papers, Waylon went through them. The more he read, the deeper his frown became. Finally, after a while, he put them down and questioned Douglas. You sure? He seems like a very important person. Will they not send any SS-ranked individuals? You don't have to worry about that. If someone of that caliber arrives, we naturally have countermeasures against it. I see. Turning his head to face me, Waylon nudged his head. What about him? Why do you want to bring him on this mission? From the looks of it, this looks like a very dangerous mission. I don't think a C-rank like him will be able to do much. You don't have to worry about that. The main goal in bringing him is so that you can watch over him. Ha! My eyes shot open. Waylon was also just as surprised as me. Facing Douglas, he asked. Watch over him. Is something going to happen to him? No. Shaking his head, Douglas secretly winked in my direction. Because it was so subtle, the only one who noticed his action was me. And the moment I did, I instantly understood Douglas's intentions. Hence why I stopped speaking. If nothing is going to happen to him, then why do you want me to look after him? Stroking his beard, Douglas vaguely said. Waylon, I'm sure you've also noticed it. You mean? Though Douglas's words were vague, Waylon, who had been with him for over a couple of years, instantly understood what he was trying to say. Douglas smiled. Right, his swordsmanship is quite lacking. Not just lacking, it's quite frankly terrible. Cutting Douglas off, Waylon looked at me. Although you did get better as you fought. Honestly, it was very painful to watch. I don't even know how you made it this far with that kind of swordsmanship. Listening to Waylon's words, I lowered my head and didn't say anything. Although his words hurt, every one of his words was correct. There was nothing for me to refute. My swordsmanship was indeed lacking. I could only calmly take the criticism at the moment. Now, Waylon, since you're also a swordsman, I thought that it'd be a good idea for you to teach him something. Didn't you say that you were getting bored? I did say that. Scratching his head, Waylon turned to face me. Scanning me from top to bottom, he looked back at Douglas. There's a bit of a problem, though. Extending his hand toward the right, a broadsword appeared in his hands. I use the broadsword while he uses a sword. So what I can teach him will only be limited to the basics. That's more than enough. I finally spoke up. There was no way I would miss the chance that Douglas had provided me. Staring at the broadsword in his hand, I lifted my head and looked at Waylon straight in the eyes. I don't need to learn any fancy techniques or stuff like that, all I want is to improve the basics. Malville said that the problem that I faced lay within my fundamentals, not in my techniques. I already had the keiki style, and that was enough. I didn't need to learn anything else. I don't have a problem with that, but... A sly smile suddenly appeared on Waylon's lips. Looking at Waylon from an angle, the sly smile on his face reminded me of Emma. My face cringed a little at the sight. Douglas, if I don't recall wrongly, didn't you say that you were also quite bored? If I'm teaching him something, why don't you teach him something as well? Douglas smiled at Waylon. His face remained completely unfazed. He took a small sip of the hot tea and put the teacup down. You don't have to worry about that, I was planning on doing that from the very beginning. Huh? Waylon looked at Douglas in surprise. Alternating his head between me and Douglas, Waylon dumbfoundedly asked. You're actually going to teach him? I will be polishing his scion control. Turning to face me, Douglas suddenly asked. Ren, was Donna the one who taught you how to control scions? Yes, for about half a year. No wonder your scion control is much more refined than your swordsmanship. Stroking his long beard, Douglas smiled in satisfaction. However, my next words caused his hand that was stroking his beard to freeze. Actually, although for a shorter period of time, Monica also taught me swordsmanship. Lowering his hand, Douglas asked with an alarmed voice. Did you just say, Monica? Douglas's reaction confused me. Ever since meeting him, not once did I see him ever get flustered. Yet, at the mention of Monica's name, his usual calm facade broke instantly. I did.
Huh?
Sighing, Waylon massaged his forehead. This makes a lot more sense now. What does? Waylon asked from the side with an amused smile. Judging from how his lips were trembling, this was also the first time he had ever seen Douglas this flustered. Ignoring Waylon, Douglas let out a helpless sigh. That child, although talented, is the worst person to ask for mentorship. She's the type of person that thinks differently from others, and so whatever she teaches is based on her experiences, which most of the time is useless on others. The more Douglas talked, the worse the smile on his face became. He then turned to face me. She is someone that has little to no patience. You probably experienced this, right? That. Recalling the bitter experiences that I went through when Monica was teaching me, I nodded my head. Douglas was right, Monica had zero patience. Whenever I got something wrong, she would throw a fit and beat me black and blue. You're right. My friend and I did go through quite a rough beating because of her. Friend? There was someone else too? Douglas alarmingly asked. Obviously taken aback by the fact that Monica not only taught me but someone else. Taking a sip of the tea, I nodded my head. Yes, you probably know him, his name is Kevin. Kevin Voss. At the mention of Kevin's name, Douglas's brows furrowed. Kevin Voss? I think I've heard that name before. I'm sure you have. Kevin was the first-year super rookie that scored some of the highest scores recorded in the history of the lock. There was no way Donna didn't talk about him. Is that so? Interesting. So you're saying that Monica trained both you and him? Correct. We were beaten by her a lot, but he deserved it. Me not so much. Deserve it? Why? Just cause. For someone to have a system yet still be unable to follow instructions, he deserves to get whatever beatdown Monica gave him. All right, enough about Kevin and Monica. Standing up, Douglas looked at Waylon. Are you okay with the arrangements, Waylon? Putting his broadsword away, Waylon also stood up.
Yeah.
I have no problem with the arrangement. That's good. Similarly, standing up, I asked. What should I do now? For now, go back and rest. You just came back from a long fight. You're in no state to fight. You're right. I was indeed quite tired from the fight. Nodding my head, I decided to bid farewell to Douglas and Waylon. However, right before leaving, I turned around and asked. By the way, you previously said that you could have us bring as many people as you wanted in the operation. Does that mean I can bring my group members? If possible, I wanted to bring them with me. This might serve as a good experience for them. Looking at each other, both Waylon and Douglas smiled. The first to open his mouth was Douglas, who said, Yes, you can. We also have an interest in them. That's good. A part of me was relieved by the fact that they also caught the attention of Waylon and Douglas. With their coaching, they might improve a lot more. All right, I will be taking my leave in. Hold on a second. Just as I was about to leave, Douglas called out for me. Tilting my head, I asked. Yes? Douglas pointed at the ring on my hand. That concealment is quite strong. If not for the fact that I was closely examining you, I wouldn't have noticed it. Douglas's words instantly caused my body to freeze. Tell me, Ren. What is a demon doing on your hand? Ding. Signaling the end of the lecture was the loud chime that rang throughout the academy halls. What are you going to do now, Kev? I'm leaving. Packing up his stuff, Kevin dashed out of the classroom, much to Emma's shock. Wait, wah. But before she could complain, Kevin had already left. Ignoring Emma, moving out of the classroom, Kevin decided to head back for his dorm. He had something to do. These couple of days, he had trouble sleeping, and this was all due to the mysterious red book that appeared out of nowhere in his room. Ever since the last experience, a lot of questions flooded his mind. But, no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't quite figure out what was going on. To make matters worse, every time he fell asleep, he would re-envision the visions that he had upon touching the book. Kevin felt that he was going crazy. Just what was going on? He knew that the answer lay in the book, but for the past few days, he had not touched it. There was a simple reason for this: the more he read it, the more his confusion grew. As such, he just decided to wait for a couple of days before deciding to read it. It was sort of like when stacking chapters for his favorite ongoing novel. C.I. Clank. Entering his room, Kevin quickly headed for his bedroom. The red book was sitting on top of his shelf above his work desk. Kevin sat down on his desk chair and took the red book out without hesitation. Hugh. Staring at the book in his hand, Kevin took a deep breath. He had a nagging feeling that today was the day. Today he was finally going to see who the person in the book was. With trembling hands, Kevin opened the book. Chapter 321, Revelation 2. Tell me why, you have a demon on your finger. As soon as Douglas's words faded, the atmosphere instantly froze. The echo of his words chilled the very air, creating a palpable tension. What's going on? Feeling that something was gravely wrong, Waylon looked at Douglas. Staring at the two for a while, I tapped the ring on my finger after letting out a long sigh. This isn't going to be easy. Looks like I can no longer hide it. Come out, Angelica. SHUU. At my call, black steam rose from my hand, much to Waylon's surprise. A stunning woman materialized next to me. Having just cancelled her taxing transformation, Angelica's face was extremely pale, and she barely had any strength to defend herself. Need a hand? Seeing how weak she was, I offered to lend her a hand, but she swiftly refused it. The moment she appeared, Waylon, who was next to Douglas, finally realized what was going on. He suddenly became wary. A demon. A threatening aura suddenly sprang out of his body, aiming towards the currently weakened Angelica. However, just as the pressure was about to crash against Angelica, Douglas waved his hand. The pressure instantly disappeared. Stop. Douglas. Waylon cried out in surprise, evidently confused by Douglas's actions. Raising his hand, Douglas calmly looked at Waylon. Wait. Turning his head, Douglas scanned Angelica up and down. A frown emerged on his usually calm face. Opening his mouth, he asked, have the demons advanced so much that their stealth abilities have become nigh undetectable? It's her skill. I replied in Angelica's stead. She has a special skill that allows her to turn into any object she wants. The downside, as you can see, is her current, weakened state, where for a while she has no demonic energy in her body. However, because of this skill, it becomes extremely easy for her to infiltrate most areas. Oh. Humming in thought, Douglas took a step forward, walking towards Angelica, who fearlessly stared at him from where she stood. She seemed unafraid and proud while she matched eyes with a seemingly overwhelming opponent. She looked dauntless. Halting a few meters away from Angelica, Douglas continued to stare at her. She coldly looked back at him, not letting her gaze falter for a moment. Their stare-down continued for what felt like forever, till finally, turning his head to face me, Douglas pointed towards the seats. I think we still have a bit to talk about. Slowly closing my eyes, I looked at Angelica before nodding my head and heading back to the seats. I understand. At the same time. Lock, Leviathan building. Flip. Flip. The sound of pages being flipped echoed inside of a room. Sitting behind a large wooden desk, dimly lit by a small lamp, Kevin's eyes darted between each page of the novel. He carefully read each line twice to make sure he didn't miss a single detail. Before long, his finger paused in front of a certain page. Leaning forward to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him, Kevin's face changed from one filled with seriousness to one filled with absolute shock. And no way. The hand holding onto the page of the book trembled as Kevin had trouble keeping himself calm. Reappearing in front of the demon, 3 translucent yellow rings appeared, revolving around his body. Bang! Just as was about to enter the demon's attack range, he stomped his foot on the ground and tried to force his body to a halt. However, it wasn't enough. His momentum was still too strong. However, he had expected that. Pointing his finger forward, a disc appeared towards his left. What followed the first disc was a second that stopped a bit further on the right. Jumping in the air, softly landed on the left ring before he propelled himself towards the right one, where he repeated his actions. Before the demon could react, was already upon it. The demon's face finally changed, but it was too late. Letting out a low cry, a powerful wave of mana suddenly burst out from his body. Hew up. Rather than making use of the Keiki style, opted to apply a simpler move. Unsheathing his sword, he swung upwards. This was no regular swing, however, as the moment the Baron rank demon was about to block the attack, using the last ring, used the gravitational effect and changed the course of the sword, once again catching the demon off guard. Poochie. Blood poured down from above, creating a misty rain of black. And no, it's not possible. Impossible. How? Dropping the book, Kevin moved back. A look of complete denial appeared on his face. It's not possible. How can he still be alive? I watched him die. The terrifying explosion, the mourning, the nightmares. How was it possible? How could he still be alive? Kevin couldn't believe it. No, he didn't want to believe it. How could he? How could he suddenly accept the fact that his friend, who he thought to be dead, was still alive? How could he accept such a sick joke? He'd be stupid if he didn't understand who the person in the book was. Who else could it be but Ren? His best friend that he thought he had lost more than a year ago. Biting his trembling lips, Kevin tried to calm himself down.
Ha! Ha!
Let's calm down. His attempts to calm down were in vain. It just wasn't possible for him to remain cool-headed. The news was too shocking for him. Could this, perhaps, be a recount of the past? Right, this could be a possibility. Perhaps what he was seeing was what had happened to Ren in the past, but the moment the Baron rank demon was about to block the attack.
Ha!
Staring at the sentence, Kevin knew that it was impossible. He knew Ren's real strength. He knew that it was impossible for the previous Ren to kill a Baron rank demon.
Ugh.
It was then that Kevin's head started to sting out of nowhere. Letting out a groan, Kevin's knees buckled slightly. Holding onto his head, Kevin supported his body by holding the top of his chair. Following the stinging sensation, the book started to glow mysteriously. Arg! The pain in his head intensified as the book brightened. Covering his eyes with his hand, it wasn't long before the glow disappeared. What just happened? Blinking a couple of times, Kevin's eyes flashed with wariness. Standing up, Kevin stared at the book with slight apprehension. As his eyes landed on the book, Kevin's eyes opened widely. That was because the black mist covering the name of the individual slowly started to fade. Wiping the side of his mouth, a subtle green glow enveloped the bottom of Ren's shoes. Right after, his body explosively shot towards the demon, like a sharp arrow. This. Kevin weakly slumped back on his chair as he absent-mindedly stared at the book. Ren's shoes. It really is him. Holding his head with both hands, Kevin's mind was a mess. He couldn't make heads or tails of the situation. Aside from the shock and relief of finding out that his best friend was alive, there was something else that Kevin was curious about. Just what in the world had happened to him, and why did he fake his death? How did he even survive such a strong explosion? More and more questions flooded Kevin's mind. After a while, Kevin's eyes landed on the book. He knew that the answer lay somewhere there. Flip. Once again flipping through the pages of the book, Kevin quickly read through every part, without missing a single detail. Now that he knew that Ren was the person in the book, he wanted to know more about what happened to him and how he was doing. Scrolling through the pages, Kevin's face would change from time to time. He would sometimes frown, oftentimes be taken aback, and sometimes laugh. The more he read, the less his worries for his friend became. Though he was in the middle of a war, he seemed to be fine. In fact, he seemed to be thriving. He had killed multiple Baron-ranked demons and was getting along with the other races.
Ha!
But then his hand paused on a certain page. Frowning, Kevin leaned back slightly. The more he read, the bigger his frown became. Before long, his face turned extremely dark. As Ren recounted the story, he tried his best to suppress his uneven heartbeat. Throughout the whole conversation, the smile on the headmaster's face slowly started to fade as his brows knit tightly. The Union joined hands with the monolith and put a bounty on me. Because of the bounty, I was forced to leave the human domain. It is also the reason why I'm here. Leaning forward, the headmaster's eyes rippled slightly. For a while, he didn't say anything. Bang. What? Kevin pounded the table violently. The sound of his fists clenching tightly resounded in the room. Union. Kevin's voice turned hoarse as he glared at the book. For them to do what they did to Ren. The veins on Kevin's forehead popped. You bastards. How could you sell out the one guy that saved your asses? For them to betray Ren like that when he had helped them, those bastards. Kevin's rage was reaching a boiling point.
Ha! Ha!
Scrunching up a piece of paper beside him, Kevin tried his best to calm himself down. Only when he read about Ren's plans regarding the Union did Kevin finally manage to relax. He realized that he was letting his emotions get the best of him.
Shh.
*T. I need to be more rational about this. If Ren, the person involved, was so calm, then, why should he, someone who did not even go through the hardships he went through, be angrier than him? Recovering from his sudden outburst, Kevin finally managed to put the pieces together. Wait, so you were 876? 876, the most notorious person in the human domain. The individual who suddenly showed up out of nowhere with a super bounty on his head. Someone who was hunted by both the monolith and the Union.
Ha!
Ren. What in the world have you done? As he put the pieces together, Kevin slowly started to feel the helplessness that Ren felt when the bounty was put up. No wonder you had to leave. Hunted by the two strongest organizations in the human domain, he had no other choice but to leave. He too would have done that if he was in the same situation. As his thoughts paused there, Kevin's brows knit. How odd. Why does it feel like I went through something similar before? Getting completely abandoned by the world and forced to leave the human domain, the scene felt oddly familiar. But that was impossible since he had never gone through it. Could it be because of the Red Book? Could the Red Book be sharing Ren's experiences with him? But how was that possible? And, why was the book connected to Ren? Instead of finding answers to his questions, Kevin was left with even more questions compared to before.
Ugh.
A sudden stinging sensation hit his head. Scratching his head, Kevin decided to stop thinking about it. The more he thought about it, the stronger his headaches became. Let's set those questions aside from now. Flip. Flipping through the next page, Kevin continued to read. He didn't want to miss a single page. You're right. My friend and I did go through quite a rough beating under her tutelage. Ren replied, with a bitter smile. The memory of the time he trained with Kevin at the lock, with Donna and Monica, was still deeply etched into his mind. Friend? There was someone else too? Douglas amusingly asked. He was obviously taken aback by the fact that Monica not only taught Ren but someone else too. Taking a sip of his tea, Ren proceeded to nod his head. Yes, you probably know him, his name is Kevin. Kevin Voss. At the mention of Kevin's name, Douglas's brows furrowed. Oh. Pausing there, an intrigued look appeared on Kevin's face. So you didn't forget about me. A relieved smile appeared on his face. His chest felt warm. Flipping the page, he continued to read. Kevin Voss? I think I've heard that name before. I'm sure you have. Kevin was the first-year super rookie that scored some of the highest results recorded in the history of the lock. There was no way Donna didn't talk about him. Is that so? Interesting. So you're saying that Monica trained both you and him? Correct. She beat us black and blue, but he deserved it. Me? Not so much. Pfft. Reading the last line, Kevin's lips trembled. Before long, leaning back on his chair, Kevin started laughing out loud. You bastard. You fucker. No wonder I sneezed so much. As he laughed, unbeknownst to him, a small tear dropped by the side of his cheek. This isn't my imagination, right, Ren? Covering his face with his arms, it finally dawned on him. Ren was alive. Chapter 322, Protection 1. So you're saying that you defeated her and in doing so convinced her to sign a mana contract with you? Douglas's clear voice echoed throughout the room. That's correct. I replied with a nod. Since the cat was out of the bag, I came clean about Angelica. I told Douglas and Waylon everything that had happened between Angelica and me, from how I defeated her to how I made her sign a mana contract with me and how we came to the current working relationship. I, of course, altered a few of the details about the story. After all, I couldn't just tell him that I defeated her through the use of the Red Book. All I told him was that Angelica was heavily injured before fighting me, and that was how I was able to defeat her. I see. Stroking his beard, Douglas looked at Waylon, who looked back at him. Do you have a copy of the mana contract with you? Waylon asked from the side. I do. Can you let us see it? Turning to face Angelica and seeing her nod her head, I nodded back. No problem. Tapping on my bracelet, an old-looking scroll materialized in my hand. Unraveling the scroll, I took a brief look at it. Mana contract. Term 1. Party A and Party B are prohibited from harming each other, regardless of means. If either party has any intention of harming the other party, the contract breached will suffer the consequences. Term 2. If Party A is in danger, and Party B has the power to help, she must provide support to other party. Term 3. The contract between the two parties will dissolve in 5 years. After 5 years, the two parties will no longer be bound by the terms of the contract. Term 4. Parties are prohibited from harming each other's self-interest. Term 5. Here you go. After taking a good look at it, I proceeded to hand it to them. Thank you. Taking the contract, Waylon and Douglas unscrolled it and took a good look at it. The silence that ensued after that felt almost suffocating. But I remained calm. I had gone through too much. T to get fazed from something like this. At the end of the day, given Douglas's personality, there shouldn't be any worries. I hope. How long do you have left in the contract? Douglas suddenly asked. How long? Frowning, I mused. If we're talking about time, counting the 8 months I spent at the monolith, the 4 months I used to get here to Henneler, and the additional 4 months that I spent with her before the monolith incident, it should be about. Lifting my head, I confidently replied. 3 years. I still have a little over 3 years of contract with her. Turning their heads to face each other, Douglas stroked his beard and once again looked through the contract. Here, you can take this back. Scrolling the scroll, he proceeded to hand me back the contract back. Thank you. Taking the contract from Douglas's hands, I put it away. What followed after was a subtle uncomfortable silence that was soon broken by Douglas, whose face returned to its usual calm. Having taken a good look at the contract, I can tell that what you were saying was the truth. Turning his head, Douglas looked at Angelica with interest. To think that you managed to get a count-ranked demon to ally with you. I was lucky. In reality, Angelica was not even a Baron-ranked demon was when she tried to fight Kevin and me. Because of the injuries she sustained from Elijah's death, her rank was downgraded to that of an untitled demon, and that was how Kevin and I were able to beat her. If Douglas and Waylon found out that Angelica had gone from Baron to Count in a mere 2 years, they'd start to grow suspicious. All right, it seems like we've taken enough of your time. You can go rest now. Glancing at Angelica, Douglas asked. Can she still turn back into a ring? I nodded my head. She should still be able to. I see. Taking the teacup, the tepid tea reheated instantly at Douglas's touch. Steam slowly diffused in the air. Then you should do so for now. Her concealment is excellent. However, it's not perfect. Waving his hand, the demonic energy that leaked out of Angelica's body suddenly stopped, and a small transparent film enveloped her. Douglas took a small sip of the tea. Although subtle, she does leak demonic energy from time to time. It was because of these subtle traces that I realized that she was a demon. This little protection I added should be able to hide her presence even better. Don't worry too much, though. Only SS-ranked individuals can see through this level of disguise. Pausing, Douglas frowned. No, wait. Elves can probably also see. The only reason you hadn't been caught till now was probably because they were too focused on the enemies rather than you. He then put the teacup down and mused. Now that I think about it, cases in which demons have worked with other races aren't all too rare. If you had explained it to the dwarves before coming here, she probably would have been able to roam around freely. You have a point. Waylon spoke up from the side. Leaning back on his chair, he said. I've already seen a couple of demons working together with the dwarves. So it's not that strange. What's strange, however, is. Turning to face me, Waylon pointed at my hand. Trying to hide a demon in your finger. That's very suspicious. Right. Now that I thought about it, what Waylon was saying was right. I shouldn't have hidden the fact that I had Angelica with me. Everything would have been resolved if I had just shown them the contract. This was a factor that I failed to take into account. Crossing his legs, Waylon once again spoke up. Now that the cat is out of the bag, are you planning on telling the others about Angelica's presence? Lifting my head and staring in his direction, I shook my head. No, I would like it if her presence still remains a secret. Oh. Why is that? Douglas curiously asked. Tap. 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 Leaning back on my chair, I tapped on the wooden armrest. Why? Briefly glancing at Angelica from the corner of my eyes, I calmly opened my mouth. Because we can use her presence to our advantage. Separating from Waylon and Douglas, I made my way towards the utility center. I needed to sell the demon cores that I had harvested during my fight. On my way there, much to my surprise, I was met with looks of approval. Be it dwarves, elves, or even orcs, whenever I went, they would nod their heads in my direction before going on about their business. It was a bit surprising, but now that I thought about it, dwarven technology was quite advanced. It wouldn't be hard for the others to see clips of how I fought. Even then, I was quite pleased with the sight. After all, their looks were a sign of acknowledgement. It meant that my efforts paid off. Following the same road as before, I walked towards the utility center's main building. See, I clank. As soon as I entered the building, I instantly spotted Malvol. He was currently leaning by the side of the reception, wiping his sweaty forehead with the large apron in his body. Upon seeing me, he greeted me with a somewhat cold voice. "You're here, human. How was your fight?" "Not bad." Taking a glimpse at Malvol, the first thing I noticed was the unpleased look on his face. He probably saw it, didn't he? Inwardly sighing, I decided to come clean. "All right, fine. I didn't fight the whole time with the sword you gave me." Tisk. The sound of Malvol's tongue clicking sounded. Turning around with his hands behind his back, he silently walked back to his workshop. There goes my chance at getting a sword forged from him. I helplessly muttered to myself as I stared at Malvol's disappearing back. The moment I took out my sword, I sort of expected this outcome. I did, after all, refuse to listen to Malvol's instructions. If I were in his shoes, I, too, wouldn't want to make a sword for someone that refused to listen to his instruction, but at the end of the day, I did not regret what I did. What was the point in having a sword if I wasn't alive to hold it? Of course, that didn't mean I was sad about this development, but it's not like I could force him to make a sword for me, right? I guess I'll just have to find another BL. "What be ye doing?" "Follow me." "Huh?" But just as I was about to leave, Malvol's voice rang out from afar. Lifting my head, I saw him standing not too far from where I was with an annoyed look on his face. "Why be ye still standing there like an idiot? Hurry up, I dinna have much time."
Yeah.
"Sure." Staring at Malvol in the distance, a smile appeared on my lips. It was a smile mixed with relief and joy. I guess things aren't as bad as I thought they'd be. "Hurry up." Coming. Following Malvol deep into the building, we soon stopped in front of a large room where an enormous furnace rested. Pang! Pang! The sound of metal being pounded sounded, and a heavy scent of iron invaded my nostrils. Standing behind the furnace was Malvol's disciple. The one I met back at his shop on the first level. Sitting down on a wooden stool, Malvol extended his hand in my direction. "Give me the sword." "Okay." Tapping on my bracelet, the dull sword that Malvol gave me appeared in my hand. "Here. Let me see." Snatching the sword from my hand, Malvol put it on the table and analyzed it. Then, flipping the sword on the table, Malvol opened his mouth and asked, "Do you know why I gave you the sword? To help me train? Wasn't this what he said before? That the purpose of the sword was to help me train?" Tisk, yes. But that's only a part of it. A part of it? The more Malvol spoke, the greater my confusion became. But before I could voice out my concerns, Malvol started speaking. "To a blacksmith, a simple sword can tell me a story." Looking closely at the sword, Malvol traced his finger across the scars that appeared on the sword. From the scratches on the body the sword to the cracks and the nicks on the sword. We can tell how a swordsman fought, and how they fight, but that be granted that they be alive. Putting the sword down, Malvol looked at me. "Had ye nae switched the sword and continued to fight using it, ye would died on the battlefield, and what blacksmiths hate the most be their swords going to waste like that." The reason why I'm nae angry at your decision be because ye proved ta me that ye value your nae stupid enough ta know when ta trainin' when not to. Is that so? I was worried for nothing. From the looks of it, Melville had never expected me to use the sword the whole time. The only reason he said what he said was probably to test me. Stroking a certain scratch on the sword, Melville suddenly asked, "Why did you want to get your sword made by me?" "Because I've heard that you were one of the greatest blacksmiths alive." I replied without hesitation. "Is that the only reason?" Melville asked, turning his attention away from the sword. What other reason other than that did he want? Musing for a moment, I tapped on my bracelet and took out the piece of ocleum that I had on me. Handing it to Melville, I added, "Also, because you're one of the only people that can handle this metal." What the? Something unexpected happened. The moment I took out the rock from my dimensional space, Melville's jaw dropped and he became flustered. Why you, where did you get that?" Chapter 323, Protection, 2. PFTT. Walking out of the utility center, I let out a chuckle. Remembering what had happened in there, I shook my head. Who would have thought that he'd go that crazy over an ore? The moment I took the ocleum out, Melville went into a crazy fit and started shouting everywhere. For a moment I was worried that he would directly steal the ore in my hand. Fortunately, that did not happen. Well, given my height advantage, I managed to stop him from stealing it by just raising my hand. But it was his over-the-top behavior that made me realize just how precious the ore in my hand was. Had it not been for his behavior, I would have never been able to tell. The scene of Melville jumping up in the air trying to grab the ore was quite comical. In fact, it was so funny that even now, I was still laughing. At least, I've come closer to my dream of forging my ideal sword. Yes. After calming down, Melville finally agreed to make a sword for me. Well, sort of. He didn't explicitly say that he would craft the sword for me, but he did say that he was now more willing to do it as long as I managed to improve my swordsmanship to the point where he would have no qualms giving it to me. I, of course, agreed to his terms. Should have probably showed this before. But it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. Either way, Melville was not going to make me a sword if I didn't prove that I was worthy of it. Therefore, even if I didn't show him the ore, the requirements would have been the same. How is it that the dwarves are so technologically advanced yet can't create a damned elevator? I inwardly grumbled to myself as I climbed up the stairs of the northern tower. Because the utility center was located all the way down towards the 4th level, the walk up the stairs was actually quite a long one. If not for my stamina, I would have long passed out of tiredness. You guys rested enough? Upon finally reaching the middle area of the northern tower, what greeted me was the sight of Ava and the others. Compared to when I left them, their complexion was much better. Although their clothes and hair were still a mess, it was now an acceptable mess, if that made any sense. "Oh, Small Snake, Ryan, good to see you guys too." Upon spotting Ryan and Small Snake, who I had not seen in a while, I warmly smiled. "Took you long enough." "Ren." Ryan excitedly shouted as he ran up to me. Ren, I think I've found a way to help you with the chip in your head." "Oh." My interest instantly piqued. "You see." But before Ryan could speak, Small Snake spoke over him. "We know a guy who can help you remove the chip." Small Snake. Ryan, who was excited about sharing his findings, was left deflated by Small Snake's interruption. Unfortunately for him, Small Snake didn't care in the slightest. After asking the dwarves working in the logistics center, we found out that there are 2 different types of professions that handle artifacts: blacksmith and engineer. I calmly said with my arms crossed. Just like Small Snake said, there were two professions that handled artifacts, blacksmith and engineers. The blacksmiths were responsible for creating the artifacts, whilst the engineers were in charge of developing the blueprint and designs of the artifact. Anyhow, since we figured that Ryan wouldn't have enough time to help you with the chip, due to how swamped we are at the moment, we decided to ask our supervisor, Bemis, for information. As he was talking, Small Snake patted Ryan's shoulder. Somehow, it looked like he took pleasure in teasing Ryan. It could have just been me, though. According to him, these kinds of problems usually lie in the engineering sector, and according to him, a guy called Jomnuk Dreamgrip can help with regards to the chip inside of your head. Blinking a couple of times, my eyes snapped open. Wait, what did you say his name was? That name sounded extremely familiar. Jomnuk Dreamgrip?
Ha!
My brow raised all the way up. Unaware of what I was thinking, Small Snake nodded his head. The world is truly small. It was then that it finally hit me. To think that the person that I was supposed to protect turned out to be the person that could help me solve the chip problem. Talk about coincidences. Tell me more. Sure. And so Small Snake started to tell me everything he knew regarding Jomnuk. As he spoke, I made sure to not miss a single detail. The more I knew about him, the better. Asterisk. Over the next 2 hours, I listened to Small Snake recount to me all the information he knew about Jomnuk. As he spoke, I took careful note of everything he said. After that, I offered him and the others to join me, but I was promptly rejected by everyone who wanted to remain on the front line. The reasoning behind this was because they felt like they could improve the most there. Although I tried to convince them to follow me, I decided to leave them be after pondering for a bit. In fact, this may have been for the best. Since I was pressed for time, I just bid them a short
goodbye
before leaving. Is this the place? Following the map that Douglas had given me beforehand, I stopped in front of a large metallic door that was deeply attached to the hard bedrock. By now, I had long forgotten where I was as I had been going through a maze of tunnels. This was to be expected, though, since the location had to be hidden. Furthermore, from what Waylon told me, the map I was given would only work for a day before it would no longer work. Apparently, the tunnels rearranged themselves every day, and so a new map needed to be made each day. Should be the place. Lowering my head, I double-checked with the map displayed on my watch. The cursor is saying that I am in the right place, so I guess I'm not wrong. Moving forward, I raised my hand and knocked on the metal door. Do dong. Who be it? Upon knocking on the door, a cold voice rang out from the other side. I am one of the guards assigned to the mission. Taking out a small device from my dimensional space, I placed it against the socket of the door. Right after I placed the object on the door, a subtle clicking sound rang out, and the doors opened. Clank! Once the door opened, what was revealed behind it was a massive room. The decoration of the place was quite simple. Hanging on the high ceiling of the room was a bright golden chandelier that illuminated the whole room. Large paintings hung by the side of the hall, and a soft red carpet rested on the ground. Around the hall, there were many different doors that led to different places of the underground mansion. Since this place was where Jomnuk had to live for an extended period of time, it was understandable for him to have a large place to himself. This way. Greeting me at the entrance of the place was a dwarven guard that led me directly towards a certain room of the underground mansion. Clank! Opening the door, what greeted me was another large room. However, this time the room was not empty as a few individuals could be seen seated on a large red sofa in the middle of the room. The moment I entered the room, all eyes fell on me. Surprisingly, there was a lot of diversity in the room as not only were there dwarves present but there were multiple orcs and elves here too. Oh, Ren, you're finally here. It was then that Waylon, who was also seated on the red sofa, greeted me. "Come, Ren, let me introduce you to someone." Before I could say anything, Waylon had already dragged me towards where the others were seated. Knowing my place, I decided to remain standing. After all, the aura that each individual seated emitted was far stronger than mine. Sitting down might displease them. Waylon didn't seem to mind this as he sat down and clasped his hands together. Then, pointing towards the dwarf seated in the middle of the sofas, he started speaking. "As you've probably seen home from the pictures, this here is Jomnuk, the individual that you are supposed to be protecting." Then, turning his attention back to Jomnuk, Waylon pointed at me. "Jomnuk, this over here is Ren. A fellow human whom I decided to bring along. Don't be fooled, though. I didn't bring him here just because he is a human. He has the skills to stay here." "I see, nice to meet you." Jomnuk greeted me with a simple nod. "Nice to meet you too." I nodded back in response. With a long gray beard that was neatly braided and balding head, Jomnuk appeared to be an older dwarf. Supporting this was the wrinkles by the side of his face. The exchange was brief, but that was how it was supposed to be. I was here to guard Jomnuk, not be friends with him. Smiling from the side, Waylon introduced me to the other people present in the room. "Over here, there's Angus, someone that I personally selected. He is an extremely skilled DWA." As Waylon spoke, my mind wandered elsewhere. More specifically, I was thinking back at what Small Snake said regarding Jomnuk. According to him, Jomnuk was a highly skilled engineer. He was extremely important because he was the only individual who knew how to access the database of the barrier around the city. He was the only one that could destroy the system as he was its creator. And it was precisely because of this that he was currently being targeted by the Duergars, also known as the Underdwarves. If they managed to kidnap him and force him to tell them how to shut down the system, they could practically end the war in one go. And lastly there is Kamaluk. He's a highly skilled orc warrior who will also be responsible for protecting Jomnuk. Distracting me out of my thoughts was Waylon's voice as he pointed at a large orc that was standing not so far from Jomnuk. Before I knew it, Waylon had already introduced everyone in the room. Nodding my head, I greeted Kamaluk. "I see, nice to meet you." Unfortunately, the orc didn't seem to reciprocate my feeling as he promptly ignored me. But I think this mostly had to do with his culture. Once Waylon finished talking, Jomnuk finally opened his mouth. "Is everyone here?" "Yes, everyone is here," Waylon replied. "Good. Ye guys must have had a lot o' trouble coming here to protect me," Jomnuk said. "I be nae an unreasonable person. Once the mission be over, I will hand out additional rewards for ye." The eyes of the individuals in the room lit up. Although they were granted a lot of achievements points at the completion of the mission, an additional reward personally given by one of the top dwarven engineers was always enticing. I can probably ask him to get my chip fixed. My eyes lit up slightly. If what he said was true, I could have him deactivate the tracking system of the chip inside of my head. This was exactly what I wished for. The meeting was a short one. Apart from a few, the rest of the individuals moved back to their posts. I, too, did that. "Good luck, Ren," Waylon said from the side. Looking back towards him, I calmly nodded back and scratched the side of my face. "Thank you. I will do my best." "Good," Waylon replied as he also scratched the side of his cheek. Upon seeing him scratch his cheek, I secretly sighed in relief. Looks like they are going through with my plans. This small gesture was a secret gesture that Waylon and I used. Prior to coming here, after analyzing the situation, I came up with a complex plan regarding the current situation. The plan was extremely risky, but the payoff was well worth the risk. After deliberating over it for a while, I shared it with Douglas and Waylon, who were initially against the idea. However, after my endless persuasions, they ended up agreeing to it. The scratch just now was Waylon telling me that there were no issues on his part.